In 2026, NASA and U.S. Space Command began investigating a sudden, unexplained satellite malfunction event that disrupted global communications infrastructure. What no one realized at first was that this wasn't just a technical failure, it was a chain reaction beginning far above Earth in systems that controlled navigation, banking signals, emergency response networks, and military coordination. Entire regions briefly lost synchronization. Systems flickered, some recovered, some didn't behave normally afterward. But the most disturbing detail was this: the malfunction didn't match any known solar activity, debris impact, or hardware failure pattern. And inside classified response rooms, analysts started asking a question no one wanted to say out loud. If this wasn't natural, then what caused it? The first alert came without warning. No explosion, no visible event, no dramatic signal from space. Just a quiet, almost invisible degradation in satellite timing systems, measured in microseconds at first, then milliseconds, then spreading across networks like a silent infection. NASA's monitoring centers flagged it as anomalous drift, a term used when systems begin to behave slightly outside expected physics models. At first, engineers assumed it was instrumentation error. But within minutes, multiple satellites, owned by different countries, different agencies, different companies, began reporting the same issue. Time itself in orbit was no longer aligning. And that was the moment everything changed. Because if satellites lose synchronization, the modern world starts to unravel in ways most people never see. GPS signals began to degrade, financial transaction timestamps began to conflict, emergency dispatch routing systems started miscalculating distances. Even aviation tracking systems showed brief inconsistencies that should have been impossible. But still, no one had an explanation. Inside U.S. Space Command, analysts pulled up real-time orbital maps expecting to find debris impact patterns or solar interference. There was nothing. No collision signatures, no radiation spikes, no geomagnetic storm indicators, just silence and instability. One senior analyst reportedly said something that would later be repeated in classified briefings. "This doesn't look like damage, it looks like coordination failure." And that single observation shifted the entire investigation, because coordinated failure implies a system, and systems imply intent. As hours passed, the anomaly spread further. Satellites responsible for weather forecasting began returning incomplete data streams. Some images came back partially corrupted. Others showed slight temporal inconsistencies, cloud formations that didn't match recorded timestamps. It was subtle but unmistakable to trained eyes. Meanwhile, commercial satellite networks started experiencing intermittent blackouts. Entire communication routes between continents briefly collapsed and re-established on alternative pathways, as if the global network itself was rerouting in real time. The world was still functioning, but it was functioning unpredictably. And unpredictability in space-based infrastructure is the first step toward systemic failure. NASA engineers began isolating affected satellites one by one, attempting to determine a common factor. Orbital position? No correlation. Manufacturer? No correlation. Country of origin? No correlation. Launch year? No correlation. It was as if the anomaly ignored every known classification system. Then came the second wave, more aggressive, more widespread, and this time it affected not just timing, but signal integrity. Encrypted communication links began to show packet loss in patterns that resembled interference, but not from space weather, from structure. One engineer described it as something pressing against the network from the inside. That phrase triggered immediate escalation because internal interference implies something already within the system, and that possibility was never supposed to exist. At this point, U.S. Cyber Command was brought in alongside Space Command. A joint task force was formed under extreme classification protocols. Even within the briefing rooms, access was restricted on a need-to-know basis that changed hourly. The question was no longer, what is happening? It was becoming, how far has it spread? Then came the most disturbing discovery yet. A set of satellites previously thought to be unaffected suddenly corrected themselves, almost like they had been temporarily out of sync and then rejoined the system. But the correction was not clean. It left behind a trace pattern, a repeating structure buried in the timing offsets, a pattern that resembled encoding. Not random noise, not failure, structure. When analysts ran it through pattern recognition systems, the result was immediate red flags. It was not a known protocol, it was not human standard communication, but it behaved like one. And that realization introduced a new level of fear into the investigation. Because if something is communicating through satellite timing itself, then the infrastructure is no longer just infrastructure, it is a medium. And that means it can be used, or worse, it can be controlled. Inside NASA headquarters, meetings stretched through the night, whiteboards filled with fragmented theories, engineers debating physics, intelligence analysts questioning geopolitical implications. But no one had a confirmed source, no origin point, no signature to trace, just effects, always effects. By the 6th hour of escalation, parts of the global network began stabilizing again. But stability did not bring relief. It brought suspicion. Because the pattern didn't disappear, it evolved, as if whatever caused it had adapted to being observed. And that is when the most uncomfortable question was raised in an internal briefing. What if we are not detecting a failure, but an observation? The room reportedly went silent, because observation implies awareness, and awareness implies intelligence, not human intelligence, something else. Outside the classified environment, the public only saw brief disruptions, delayed navigation apps, short communication outages, temporary glitches in weather forecasting. Most assumed it was a technical malfunction, a glitch in the system, something that would be fixed. But inside classified networks, the tone was very different. This was not being treated as a glitch, it was being treated as an event with no known precedent, and possibly no end. As the investigation continued, one final pattern emerged. The anomaly was not random across time, it was synchronized with orbital alignment cycles, meaning it was not just happening in space, it was happening with space, as if something was using orbital geometry itself as a framework, a structure, a language, or a map. And that realization changed everything, because maps are not accidental. Maps are created, and creation implies purpose. The final classified line of the day, recorded in an internal briefing, read, "We are no longer looking at a malfunction, we are looking at behavior." And in that moment, the entire investigation shifted from engineering to something far more uncertain. Because if space infrastructure can behave, then someone or something may already be inside it, and we might not be the ones in control anymore. We might only be the ones noticing. Too late.